Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission here is to help 1 million people start a business of their own and ensure that anyone that does start a business never feels alone doing it. We believe here that anybody can become an entrepreneur. No one's born a doctor, no one's born a lawyer. Everybody needs help. Of course, there are all sorts of different types of doctors, from brain surgeons to GPs with different skills to suit that application. And that's what we believe here at the Good Luck Club, that we can help you learn to be whatever type of entrepreneur you would like to be. We also believe, as you guys know well, that libraries need our love here in the UK in particular. Libraries are becoming a thing of the past. COVID hasn't helped, but libraries are the only place that you can go today where no one asks you for money when you walk through the door. And having spent a lot of time in libraries myself, quite often it's the only place people can get access to Wi-Fi. So we're on a mission to help save libraries. We believe libraries in the future can be entrepreneurial centres. Kids after school can go there and learn entrepreneurship. And of course, right now when you can't go there, you can still plug in and get the knowledge through podcast shows like this. Libraries are not places where books sit. Libraries are knowledge centres, and knowledge these days comes in many forms, including podcasts like this. If you want to get more involved in our library initiative, please click the link below. And today, I'm very excited to have an incredible entrepreneur, a very inspiring person, Brett Wigdortz. He's an OBE, he is the CEO of Tiney, and I think you're going to really enjoy his story, his insights, and his view on the world today. Brett, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
No, thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wonder if we could start off by my audience that don't know you, perhaps you just sharing your story.
Sure. As you can tell from my accent, maybe I'm originally from America, and I moved to England about 18 years ago. I was originally a management consultant, and then in 2002, I started the charity Teach First, which has a mission to address educational disadvantage and ensure that all children have access to an outstanding education. And I ran that for 15 years, and we grew it to become the largest graduate recruiter in the UK. And I was really excited to be a social entrepreneur through that, and then helped found Teach for All, which is now in over 50 countries around the world, with Teach First sister programs in countries as diverse as India and Australia and Peru and Germany and Nigeria and elsewhere. And I left about 2.5 years ago after 15 years there. And I started, I'm currently chairing National Citizen Service, which some of your listeners might know, which is a great initiative that has hundreds of thousands of young people participating. And then I also started a VC-backed digital startup called Tiney about 2 years ago. And our goal there is to unlock the potential of every child, really focused on early years. And we're really focused on the youngest children, those below the age of 6.
Oh, fascinating. I actually am an angel investor myself. I just invested in a business myself that's also doing that home education, Montessori inspired. I think there's a real gap, right? There seems to be a real need for more support for the younger years. How did you come up with this idea? What was the premise of it?
Yeah, exactly like you said, there's a massive gap for young kids. So working in education for 15 years, I've visited hundreds and hundreds of schools all over the world. And what you really quickly realize is the education gap starts very young. So if you want to ensure, as I think most people should, that every child has access to an outstanding education, you need to start young. You can't start when they're teenagers or even start in primary school. But yet very few countries or systems have great early years education. And we know just so much scientific development, brain science over the last 10 years has shown, so much happens in young children's brains, and you can do so much to really help them develop into great adolescents and great adults at that age. So the goal of Tiney is to really help ensure every child gets a great education, to help develop the next generation of great practitioners, people who are working with the youngest children, and help make them great early years educators, and help them start small businesses in their homes where they can have small nurseries in their homes that can really have a great educational philosophy to help young children.
It's so perfect for the situation people find themselves in right now too, right, where a lot of people are also having to educate their own children when they weren't expecting it, with things like schools closed. How does it actually work? What's the nuts and bolts of the model? What do you actually provide?
So when I left Teach First, I've been ruminating on this idea for a few years, and it's something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what could be happening in early years. And the first thing I realized is I couldn't do it myself. So I think, having been a social entrepreneur for 15 years, and maybe some of your listeners might be interested, I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of thinking, it's a one-person show or it's something they can do themselves. I don't have a digital background. I know very little about digital or tech or product. And so the first thing I did is I spent maybe about 9 months trying to find a co-founder who was a good digital background. And I must have met 60 or 70 people during that time. And I just kept on trying to meet more and more people until I met my co-founder, Ed Reed, who was one of the founders of Graze, the snack business, and was CTO there. And together we also found our third co-founder, John, who founded a digital design studio. And then our fourth co-founder, Stephanie, who's come from Uber, who's a great customer experience background and with logistics. And I think that was the first thing I realized, is I needed to put the right team together in order to make this happen, because I didn't have the skills myself. I think the second thing, was we started talking to lots and lots of childminders, talked to lots of nurseries, talked to lots of parents, really tried to understand the system and the problem out there. And I felt like, from my time at Teach First, I had a pretty good idea of the problem, and we learned a lot more. And then the next stage was to raise some money, which is obviously an important part of it, and from angels, and then from Local Globe, who was our first institutional investor, in Jam Jar, two great VCs, and then more recently raised a second round from Index Ventures as a C+ round. And with that, it was really about starting to build a team, starting to build a product, working closely with customers, really constantly iterating what works and what doesn't, and trying to get product market fit.
Such a great lesson in that story for my listeners. I don't want them to miss it. And I think that one of the things we hear a lot within our community is people want to start businesses, but they need money. Of course, money is very important. But the way you've described it, you find a team, talk to customers, then find money. I think that's really important for people to see that process. Sometimes you can get people on board before you've got all the money. In fact, I'm sure the people that came on board in the early days also invested. That's what's happened to me. And I think a lot of people miss that step. They think, I can't start because I need money. But you can talk to potential customers before you've got money. You can talk to people that might join you before you've got money. And that's what your story illustrates, I think.
No, I totally agree. I think obviously money is important for a startup to be successful. But if you don't have if you're not solving the right problem, if you don't have the right team, money's not going to get you very far.
Totally. And I'm sure raising money is never easy. I don't care what anyone says. We all know it's not easy, but it's a lot easier if you've got a good team and your customers want it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. When you have the team and you can show that, there's people out there willing to pay for the product you want to develop, it makes it much easier to raise money.
Was it hard, moving from, I'm looking at your CV, just stepping back for a second, you were at McKinsey in your early career for a few years, and then you started Teacher First. And of course, moving through, from, say, a job to starting a social enterprise. Again, a lot of our listeners do talk about wanting to start social enterprises. Are there any insights, tips, or history there you think is worth sharing?
It's interesting. I mean, I kind of ran Teach First a bit more like a VC-backed company than a charity, and I've kind of enjoyed the working for a VC-backed company in that it's very focused on growth, on impact. Just my way of wiring. I get bored I always get frustrated about very small charities that are having a great impact, but only for a few people. And whenever I see that, I always think, well, how can you do this for more people and have a bigger impact? And how, even though it's lovely for those people you're helping, how can you really change the system? And that's what I always want to do at Teach First. And it's often hard to do for a charity. There's very few charities, I think, that grow as fast as Teach First did. And it's one of the reasons I wanted this to be actually more of a VC-backed company than a charity, because I really I thought we could actually make a bigger difference by getting something that could grow and get to lots of people very quick. I do think, impact and values-based companies are in all sectors, not just charities. And I think our investors have been really excited about our values and the impact we're having. I think our staff have, and our customers have been. So, and I think there's more and more examples of companies that are really strong values and really strong mission focus, which I hope and I feel that's the direction the whole economy is going. That's where people want to move much more into.
It's a really interesting gap you're talking about. In fact, I think our platform falls into the same gap. One side, charity, where there is a feeling like you only survive as long as people give you money. And then there's the other side, which is almost like the business world that's seen somewhat as, profit, making money and greed. But there's something, I think, in the middle, which is a sustainable, scalable business that does good, right? I hope you're right. I think you're right. that there is a wave of this type of business coming? Because I've seen a lot of social enterprises who try to raise money from VCs, for example. They struggle because the VC feels, they don't want to take the money out of something that needs that money to grow. So they find it hard to get their capital out. How did you get that balance right in Teacher First, for example?
Yeah, so Teach First was a pure charity. And we had like a three-way funding model where on average, about a third of our funding came from central government sources because we were providing a service to them by recruiting teachers. About a third of our money was kind of a fee for service from schools and other sources where, schools would normally pay a recruitment fee to someone and we would get that. And then a third would come from philanthropy. So we raise money from businesses and individuals and foundations. And it's a drag raising money nonstop for charities. It's a full time. If CEOs and founders of VC-backed companies think fundraising is a drag, charities is more difficult because you're doing it nonstop all the time. And often there's lack of alignment. Funders aren't always totally aligned on what you're trying to do, and and in some ways it can be a bit messier than with a company when you're raising money.
Very interesting point. You also talked there about impact. I guess a lot of people have small businesses. Again, a lot of our listeners are like this, and they want to grow them into bigger businesses and impact. So, how do you measure success, for example? How do you gauge that?
At Teach First, with the struggle I think a lot of charities have is you can measure success based on what you're doing. So it's very easy as a charity to say, great, we're successful because we're the largest recruiter in the country, we're recruiting a lot of teachers, or our turnover's grown, or this, that, or the other. But the truth is that's not success, and at Teach First, I always try to get us to what is the end user. The end user is the child in Grimsby, in wherever, in a low-income community who isn't getting the education they need, who should get a better education. And are they getting a better education? And if not, we're failing. And if they are, we're succeeding. And I was always trying to get the data around that as a way to measure our success. So like in the communities we're in, do children from lower income backgrounds, are they getting a better education, or not? And that's success. And I think it's very hard for charities to measure success. In companies, in some ways it's easy because you're either making money or you're not. And I think, again, what makes it more difficult is if you want to be an impact-focused business like Tiney, we want to be profitable. We have to be profitable to be sustainable and to grow and everything. And that's important. But also if we're doing that, but we're not providing a great education for children, and, obviously if their safeguarding is not perfect and our practitioners, the educators aren't, enjoying their life and everything, then we're still failing. And it's trying to get that balance right of different goals. I think that's always difficult when you're creating something that isn't just about profit.
So when you make that move from, I guess the I'm going to call it charity section, but I think sector, but I guess it's more than that. But that model, I guess, to a VC-backed, value-based company, is there a big difference? Have you noticed a big difference in the two models, or is it actually similar?
I mean, there's more similarities, I think, than people think. I think, sometimes people think charities aren't well run or are well, are different. And I think some charities are very well run, and people work very hard. And yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessarily easier or harder. I think what I find with VC backed is there's more of a focus on growth and growing your impact. And I quite like that. I think often in the charity world, boards are very risk averse, are much more risk averse, because I think often the boards don't get the advantage of success, but they have the problems of the fall. So if a charity fails, the board gets in trouble or has a problem. Well, if they succeed, the board doesn't really get much personal benefit. And I always thought, God, it would be great if we could make these decisions based on children in the areas we're not in. Because whenever I try to go to a new area, the board would always push back a bit, or even the staff would be like, oh, we're going too fast. We're, moving too fast. And I always thought, but those children in that area we're not in, if they were at this table, they'd say, please come to us now, because we're getting a crappy education and we need to improve our education and we need great teachers. And unfortunately, they don't get a voice. So often the end user, the end beneficiary, doesn't get a voice in charities, which I think is sometimes a problem. So in some ways, at least at this stage, I'm really enjoying the current setup where we're all aligned on how do we make Tiney as successful as possible and really grow to get to as many people as possible.
And how do you get a product like Tiney to the community you're talking about? What's the marketing strategy for a business like this?
So, I mean, our main customer now is the childminder. We're calling them tiny home nursery owners. where there's a real shortage now, and we're trying to get more of that supply into the market. The other side is demand, because there's parents looking for childcare. But the truth is, there's so much demand for childcare now that actually that's less of a problem. So with the supply, what we're looking for is, a lot of our people come from nursery or early years education background themselves, about half of them. And we're able to tell them, look, rather than earn minimum wage or close to that, and have a difficult situation, join Tiney. You'll get fantastic professional development, fantastic training. You'll earn a good salary. You can do it from your home. It's more flexible. We'll treat you like professionals. You'll be part of a fantastic cohort and community. And then I think the other half of the people joining us a lot of them are parents, mostly moms of small children, who want to work from home while taking care of their child. And, our pitch is really to them is, look, you could have a great career helping others, professional development, while taking care of your own child, and really get great fulfillment from a really good job here. And we're seeing that working. And we're, pre-COVID, we were finding people all over the place through schools and through networks and stuff. Now we're doing a lot more online advertising, but finding networks and people introducing us to other people and finding them is the best way to get in touch.
I was going to say, the big part of our listening network are single mums and dads that want to be with their children, but need to earn a living. And so it's really apt that you're here sharing this product with our audience, because it could support them, and that's very important. I wanted to understand a little bit about your journey, because I'm just so blown away with what you've created and how you've managed to build an entrepreneurial career that I feel is very focused on building things that help people regardless of benefit to you. So I look back, how did you get this mindset? I mean, so many people start a business. It took me probably 8 companies before I even heard the word purpose. I built a business to make a living. I wanted to make money. And then slowly I realized that money wasn't the key thing, and I evolved. I feel like you went straight from McKinsey into a business that had purpose. Did you grow up with parents that knew this mindset? Did you just naturally have it? For my audience out there listening that can't even grasp purpose, how did this happen to you? How come at such an early stage in your career you knew this?
I don't know, to be honest. I wish I had like a moment where I can say a great story. I mean, I came from a family of teachers and educators, so I always think education is important. I think I've just always, I enjoyed working at McKinsey, but there was times when we had clients and I just thought, what's the point? Like, it wasn't very exciting to help a bank just get slightly more profitable on the margins. I just found that, not quite as interesting, basically. And I think when I started Teach First, I visited a number of schools in London in 2002 that were just really bad. And I think there's no other way to put it. They just were not doing their core job of educating the children in those schools well. Those children, young people, teenagers, were not leaving the school with a good education. And I remember visiting them and thinking, this is just totally not fair. This is a massive problem. I met one head teacher who said, my goal is just to keep these kids off the street and out of jail, just to give you an idea. And I just thought, that's ridiculous. Like, who would want their children to go to school? And it's not fair at all for these young people. They're getting a completely raw deal. And I thought there's a way to solve this problem. And I guess I just got excited about this as a problem that needed to be solved, and it just started from there, I think, just thinking that this was a situation that wasn't fair, could be solved, and needed to be solved. And I think as an entrepreneur, both that and with Tiney, I always start with problems. Like, these are problems that just need to be solved. And I think that's what drives me more than even purpose or money or anything. It's just solving problems. Like, these are big problems that need big solutions. And that's a lot of fun, I think, solving big problems.
It's a great driver. Again, for my listeners, I hope you guys pick up on this. Finding purpose can come from finding a problem that you want to solve. So many people don't know how to find purpose, right? But if you've got that problem and bit between your teeth, so it was easy to quit McKinsey. There was no hesitation. Out of there and off you went. Was it that simple? Did you have long conversations with your parents and they said, was it a difficult or easy decision?
Yeah, I think everyone I spoke to said I was mad and crazy and it was the dumbest idea anyone's ever heard of. So, and I did actually, and McKinsey was very, very nice. They gave me like a 1-year sabbatical to try to get it started, with the idea I would then, come back. And that was my original thought. And then after a year, I thought, oh my God, I really enjoyed McKinsey too, but I just thought this is so much more fun than being a management consultant. And so after a year, I just ended up doing it for good. But yeah.
That's fantastic. And then just looking through, and you talked about something I think is also really important for my audience to understand, and we could delve into it for a second, which is, building a business and co-founders. And so I think that the whole mindset is you have to have someone to start a business with and co-found it together. But what you're saying is you had the idea and then you went out and found the person you needed to make that idea happen and brought them on as a co-founder. So that person who's your co-founder doesn't have to be their own idea to be your co-founder, but you can, you interviewed 70 people, you said. I mean, a lot of people, again, they think they don't have technical skills, so they just give up at that stage and the perseverance piece. But what do you think about co-founders? Do you think in your case with a technical product are probably crucial, but in your early career, did you have co-founders?
I mean, I didn't have like an official co-founder teach first, but there was tons of people involved at the beginning, mentors, original staff, supporters. I can think of 5 or 6 in particular who probably should be co-founders. And I think definitely a lesson is it's impossible to do anything like this on your own. Like I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who just really is a founder and does it on their own. And I think that maybe is a myth from my experience that no one has all the skills necessary. And I think that's maybe something I've really focused on in my career is just trying to surround myself with people who are much better than me in all the skills needed to make something happen. And, I think I have a really good understanding of my lack of skills in many areas and the need, that anything I do will not be successful if I don't find people who can buttress those areas.
And how do you know when you find the right person? What's the criteria?
I mean, I think from my experience, there definitely has to be a values link. I think the biggest mistakes, just to start, the biggest mistake I've made is hiring people who have the skill set. They definitely have to have the skill set and they have to, want to do the job and everything. And I've hired people like that before, though, who I've always worried, they don't really fit the values, or this isn't, what excites them in the right way, or they're asking questions that make me really worried about, why they're joining this. And almost every time that's never worked out well. Like it's always not been a good experience. And I think over my career, I've learned more and more about the importance of hiring people who really are bought into the values and the mission of what you're trying to do, and see themselves as like that's a core of what they're trying to achieve. And, and just like someone who has huge skills, but it's a bit of a prima donna, I think that's always a negative for an organization.
Another great insight from you there. I think I always say manage purpose, not people. Mm-hmm. If people are bought into the purpose, they're self-motivated, generally speaking. So it's really important. I think the values thing is, I think moral code is just generally also not talked about enough in business and who you do business with. I've had plenty of bad partnerships because we had different moral codes, not judging anyone out there, but you've got to know yourself. And when you're interviewing people, have those conversations about what actually matters, right? And people don't, I think. They look, like you say, they look at a skill set, maybe a CV, and they hire on that. But checking values is really important.
I mean, if I could say, I spend, like for some of my senior team, I do tons and tons of call references. I always find like that's amazing. Like I'm just thinking our COO who we brought on, I think I must have spoken to 7 or 8 people who have worked with her, and I had long phone conversations with all of them, not email or anything. I think that's a great use of time. And we all do these, the 4 of us together have a coach and have done these behavioral tools to see where we all fit and really understand how we communicate to each other. And I think investing time in those sort of things can be really useful also.
It's just doing the groundwork, isn't it? I think references is one that's like, even on the investment side, I'm sure on the investment side, when you bring an investor in, you also want to check who they are and what other investees have experienced, right? So I think checking with the community in both sides, I do see it neglected in people when they're building businesses. They don't get references. They're moving too fast in that regard. I mean, in startup land, it's all about moving fast, right? Somehow, but that those steps can save your business later. If you get the wrong person in, it's a catastrophe, right?
Absolutely. You're never waste time getting another reference. That's never a bad use of time, I think.
I couldn't agree more. Do you think there was a big break moment in building the platform? I mean, if you teacher first, for example, you 15 years building that. Do you think there was moments when you just went, wow? Was there any particular challenges where you thought this is it, it's over?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely ups and downs in our early years. We needed to get government support to make it happen, and we worried a bit about that and some funding crises early on. I think 2 or 3 years in, we suddenly hit, we had that moment that everyone always wants to hit, where suddenly we were going to Oxford, for instance, and doing a milk round event, and the room was packed, and we had to get bigger rooms and everything, and we were just sold out for everything, and we were just growing really fast, and I think it was first Gordon Brown, and then actually on the other side, Michael Gove wanted to invest more from government side, and schools really wanted more, and it just felt like it was a 5-year period, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years after we got started, where it just felt like that flywheel was moving really fast, which is a really intoxicating feeling, which we haven't quite gotten to that moment yet at Tiney. I'm hoping we're very close, and it's a wonderful feeling to have.
Yeah, that takes a lot of build up, doesn't it? That credibility, holding it together. I want to say faking it till you make it for a while. Yeah, there's all sorts of pieces, right?
It's a lot of small change. Like my experience, like there's some big change you have to make, but also it's like 100 small changes. Like I think it's just constantly improving things. And 100 tiny improvements often is what something needs. I remember at Teach First, just lots of small changes, improvements we had to make. And it's a lovely feeling when you get there.
Oh, it's hard work. The thing I find interesting, and this is government involvement in something. Sometimes to me, and many people I know who are listening, they love the idea of government supporting their business, especially if sounds like they're kind of a client for you in a way, right? You're servicing the need that the government can't service itself. Do you think it's based when you're a charity structure, it's easier to get government support than, say, for example, with Tiney now as a VC-backed value-based company? Does it change the dynamics with organisations like the government?
I don't know. In our current role, we aren't looking to get really funding from government, basically, because early years is much more of a private sector sort of space. I mean, we get some funding from government, but it's more the parent gets the money to pay for childcare, and then we get it from the parent. I'm trying to think if it's a big difference. I mean, why I worked in Teach First is we were meeting a government need. Like, I think the Department for Education was struggling to get enough great teachers into like low-income schools, especially in some areas of the country where, and I think we had a way to do that. And so that was a core government need that I think we were able to provide a solution for. So that sort of fit. I know a lot of charities really struggle to get any money from government. And, I think it just kind of worked to us because like the need we were providing is something that the government felt they needed to provide. Like it was sort of a core problem that we were helping them solve.
It's interesting. You mentioned earlier as well, kind of like the 3 ways you make revenue from a business. And I think that's an interesting one too, because a lot of people rely on one income stream. I always like the LinkedIn model because they've got 4 or 5 different ways to bring in income. Membership fee all the way through to corporate partners and so on. Does Tiney have a model like that? If you kind of copied and pasted a similar formula?
Yeah, it's funny. We're a operating system for our childminders. So we have something called Tiney Wallet, where all the money that they get from lots of different sources, we're able to deal with that, and we're now FCA approved as Tiney, and makes a much easier payment. And basically, we take a percentage of the money that goes through our platform, which is our main revenue source. We've also, we do all the training. We do lots of support for our childminders, training and support and community, and lots of education support and safeguarding and insurance and registration and all sorts of things. But in addition to that, we're also charging a induction fee, basically something for the training to help them get registered. I think longer term, the idea is, can we provide more services for the community and the parents, and can we help them in different ways? And, I think once you figure out how you can help people, then revenue can usually follow from that.
That's true. Good advice. What was the hardest moment in business for you? Anything that jumps out?
I've had a lot of hard moments. A lot of the hard moments I've had is how to manage teams. And, I don't think I'm a natural manager of teams. I, struggle with it. To me, I'm just so like mission focused. I just think, well, why isn't everyone else just focused on this thing? And of course, everyone has their own needs. Everyone like has their own career plans. Everyone, acts differently. And it's something like I often have to take a step back and remember. You learn how to manage people in different ways who require, different support. I think I've made some mistakes there. I think a couple of times, as I mentioned before, I've hired people who are great skills, but aren't really values or mission aligned. And that's never really worked out great. That's been problematic at different moments. I think probably that's been my biggest learning curve over the last 15 years, is how to be a better manager and how to hire and support a team better.
Well, Steve Jobs had a similar problem. He hired a CEO that didn't work out. So, even the best of us have that problem, I guess.
I hope I'm not as bad as him from some stories I've heard.
Well, yeah, that's a different podcast, I think. I was interested in your own education. I mean, you're so heavily involved in education yourself. Your parents were both teachers, you mentioned, right? So what was your own education like?
I mean, it was basically a normal education. I grew up in New Jersey in the States, and I grew up in a small town. I went to the local school, and it was interesting. My school had a real mix of kids, some of whom went to university, some of whom, dropped out. And it was a very real mixed school, I'd say, of lots of different backgrounds. And so it was a fine, I wouldn't say I had an outstanding education, but it was fine. And I think, what was true for me and is true for many kids is if you come from a family of educators or a family that, has experience in education, it doesn't matter if your school is average. Like an average school is probably fine. You'll do okay. The problem is if you're a child who doesn't have that family and community support, then you really need an outstanding school, and you definitely need outstanding teachers around you. And that's something from Teach First is how do we ensure those children get the best teachers, because they need them more than anyone.
Mm. Well, I've got a 3-year-old, and so I'm trying to be a good father, and part of that is being a good teacher, right? I mean, it's got to learn to be a teacher yourself and communicate. But you've got 3 kids. I mean, what's their education been like, do you think? I have an issue a little bit with education in the UK and the way it kind of formats people. I feel in some respects it teaches people not to be entrepreneurs. It puts fear in them around risk. But what's your view? It doesn't have to be the same as mine. I'm just interested.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about British education. I mean, I think in some ways, my children, I'll go to the local primary school, and I love our local primary school. It's a very diverse school, and I think it's a great head teacher. I'll give a shout out to Highgate Primary School, which is, I just think it's a great caring teachers, great head, and it's just a nice, diverse, caring community there. I think there's some things. I'll start with the good parts about British education. Is it's a lot better than I think it was 20 years ago, and often everyone focuses on the negative. And in some ways, having a strong regulator like Ofsted, a focus on GCSEs, gives a higher floor than used to. And when we started, a lot of children dropped below the floor, and there was nothing holding them up. And you see that in America too. A lot of schools don't meet minimum standards, and no one really cares. And and I think more kids are getting an adequate education now than 10 or 20 years ago. So that and I think to start with that's a success, because I've met lots of these kids, and it's very hard for children now to go through education and not at least get a good education, let's say. Now that said, I do worry sometimes there's so much specialization. It's much more specialized, and when you see like 14-year-olds having to specialize on just a few topics, or so test focused, like I see 14-year-olds just already were 13-year-olds worrying about GCSEs and forgetting about like the wider subject, or when they're studying English, just spending time memorizing poems and maybe not learning how you can enjoy literature in different ways. There's certain things definitely in education that I don't think I think can be improved. But I think it's a difficult balance. I'm always like much more a moderate middle ground on this, because I think if you don't have exams, then it's often the poorest kids who get most disadvantaged, because there's no way for them to improve, and there's no way to see if their schools are doing well or not. So if you don't have exams, you need to find some other way to help kids from the poorest background and to ensure that their success can be measured. And so I don't think there's any. I've been to schools all over the world. I don't think I've seen a perfect system. There's no perfect system anywhere in the world. And I think in the end, it all gets down to great teachers, great leadership, great people in the system who just care about the kids. And every system has its pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I left school at 15, but looking back at my school years, I enjoyed subjects because of teachers. And how they presented the subject. Like I absolutely loved history because of my history teacher. I am actually dyslexic, but I enjoyed English because my English teacher was quite quite inspirational. And so it's interesting, isn't it? I think, it's the teachers are so important to the process, and unfortunately they also feel like they're the most neglected in the system.
Yeah, no. There's a saying. No, it's true. No school can be better than the teachers in the school. I've never seen a school that's has bad teachers and it's a great school. And so I don't think there's anything more important than the quality teachers, which is why it's what we focus on. And the same in early years. I mean, it's probably why I've focused my career on that topic, because I think, in some ways, British education is really easy. If you want it to be outstanding, however many schools there are, 20,000 schools, find 20,000 outstanding individuals to be head teachers of these schools and give them, as much autonomy as you can and let them go lead it. 20,000 wonderful educational entrepreneurs. That's one way.
Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah.
Sorry. It's not easy, but, it's also wouldn't be rocket science if people just focused on that problem.
Interesting. There is talk sometimes within the education system about, for example, in England, getting rid of the private school system because it creates a divide between the rich and poor, and the money goes into the private schools, and therefore the non-private schools, I get confused. I've lived all over the world, get confused, private, public. But the point is that the schools that don't have the wealthy families in them, therefore get underfunded and don't have the computers they need, for example, or the things they need to support the teachers, and the teachers end up buying the paper and the pencils for we all know those stories, which is absolutely ridiculous for their students. So do you think that's a good idea or not?
I'm not a fan of private schools, and I certainly think I question people I sometimes meet in my social circles who send their kids to private schools, why they do it. When I say, look, I know the school in your area, it's a great school. Why would sometimes I don't understand it. I think comprehensive schools often, are definitely the best if you can get them all working really well. I often give an example about grammar schools. There's Kent is one of the few areas of England that still has grammar schools. A few miles west of Kent, in East London, there are no grammar schools. In East London, there are some of the best low-income schools in the entire world. I could name you 10 schools in East London that have most of their kids from low-income backgrounds that are among the best schools in the world. They're just truly outstanding schools. And many of your listeners won't even realize just how many truly outstanding schools there are in low-income areas in East London, like globally outstanding. You go 20 miles to the east, you're in Kent, you see very few, if any, that I know of, outstanding schools in low-income areas. And the reason is because grammar schools, I think, change the market and take out some of the kids. And, the kids who aren't going to grammar schools often feel like losers. And, those schools struggle to get the best teachers and all these things. And I think that's the biggest difference there. And I think, separating children in that sort of age is not a good idea. I think you need to build great comprehensive schools and ensure every child there gets a great education. And it's not impossible to do. And that's what's best for the entire system. Education can't be a win-lose, zero-sum game. You can't have a great education for some and not others. That just doesn't work in a modern society.
And I as someone, without sounding arrogant, I could send my son to a private school. I could afford to do it, but I actually went to a public school, and I valued that education from a human perspective. Because my family were wealthy, they lost all their money, but they were very wealthy when I was at a public school. And in a way that I mixed with all sorts of different people from different walks of life. In a way, it made me appreciate what I did have, but equally also respect and understand other people's ways of living. I think in private schools, sometimes it becomes a bit of a bubble. And not to judge, because I also know a lot of good people in private schools, but it is definitely a problem as a parent, because you feel like somehow you need to give your child the best access to the best teachers, and if the best teachers are going to private schools, it kind of drains from the schools that would have those teachers otherwise. It's a real complex problem that does need thinking about, I think. Yeah,
I would just say there's tons of great comprehensive schools now in England, some really good ones. And I was talking to someone, I won't name who's an expert on mental health and stress and everything, gave a talk on it. And then afterwards, he mentioned his, I think, 8-year-old who was getting very stressed, or we were trying about something else. His 8-year-old was getting stressed because of taking some exams to go to private school. And I didn't even understand what he was talking about, because I knew the little primary school his child was going to. And I said, oh, I know that school. That's a fantastic school. I know the teachers there. Why would you even want your child not to continue going there? And he just looked at me like, well, of course I want my child to go to a private school. But there was no reasoning behind it. And right. I knew the school, and I just thought, no, private school is not going to be any better than the school they're going to. Why are you putting a a small child through this stress for no reason, as well as having to spend, whatever, hundred thousands of pounds or whatever for something you can get for free.
Well, I mean, it's I guess it's a very delicate subject for people that listen and have either gone to a private school or putting their kids in a private school. No offense to them, but I think sometimes it is also, and this will offend them, almost like a trophy, isn't it? Like I know someone who sent their child to Eton, and they said it like it was their car, or where they live, like a trophy. My son's at Eton, as opposed to like, well, are they enjoying it? What are they doing there? None of that came up. It was just that, oh, my son's at Eton. I guess it's a prestigious thing, isn't it? Sometimes as well, and that's what I don't like about it. And I'm worried about the education system. But it's interesting when you see. I think is it Sweden that did ban private schools? I think it's Sweden.
Yeah, I know. I know most. I remember looking at one point. I mean, England, the UK has one of the highest percentages of children in private schools. I think the highest in Europe, from what I remember. A lot of schools hardly send anyone, unless very religious kids or something. I think. Looking at some countries, it was basically only for very religious children. And some have banned private schools. I mean, it is some way a British thing, and I probably don't totally understand the culture behind it, but yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't want to talk down anyone who sends their kids to private schools. And some do it for very good reasons, and there's all sorts of good reasons. And but I think generally a successful education system is one where you can send your child to any school on any street corner and they'll get a great education. And that's what we should work towards.
It's nice to have an upbeat view on education. I must admit, personally, I'm quite down on it quite often. So it's actually nice to have, like you say, a balanced view on actually, in particular in the UK. Our podcast is listened to by people all over the world, but I think the UK education system on the it's pretty good. Non-private schools are pretty good, and I think that's something to be proud of. Actually, I just wanted to step back and say, it's well deserved, your OBE. That must have been a very special moment for you.
Yeah, no, that was exciting. And having been born in America and now be a immigrant, naturalized British citizen, it was great, obviously, to go to Palace with my mom and my wife and my kids, and Prince Charles giving it to me. And it's very funny. And yeah, the only time I really use it is when my children tell me I'm pronouncing a word wrong because they make fun of my American accent. And I said, look, I'm an officer of the British Empire. Who are you telling I'm pronouncing the word wrong? But my kids don't seem to listen to me when I say that for some reason.
Well, that's the beauty of kids, right? They don't have to listen to you. You were also Ernest Young Social Entrepreneur of the Year. I mean, that's also quite an exciting thing to be recognised in that space. And did these things help you in developing the business, or is it didn't really matter? It's just
I don't know. I mean, I guess where they help is attracting talent. Probably, I'm guessing is when I meet with like people like Ed or John or Stephanie, my co-founders. I'm guessing if they see these things, they think, okay, this is someone more serious who can make things happen. I mean, I think that's probably where it's most useful, is kind of to attract, really other, great people to the cause.
It's interesting having dual citizenship. My wife also has dual citizenship. She's Hong Kong. She's got 3, New Zealand and English. She had a Chinese mother from New Zealand and an English father. And so it's always interesting when I say to her, where do you see yourself from? And she says, there's no location sometimes for home. And so what's your take on that? When you ask where are you from? I mean, you still sound American with an English twang to you in your voice, but how do you see home now?
I mean, I love London. I really do. And I've lived here almost 20 years, and my family, my wife and children, my wife's British, and, but I'm always from New Jersey. I mean, I think it's where you were a child. Like, what's the test when, I think England played American football, and of course I rooted for America. I still like NFL. I was still, in tears when I watched the inauguration of Biden yesterday, and, heard Lady Gaga sing the national anthem and all that, so I think part of me will, always be American where I was born, but I love London. I love living in Britain.
I also cried, so I don't think it's the Americans' right to be the only ones that find that stuff incredibly moving. And so, but I hear you. I know what you mean. Do you support a British football team?
Well, in America, I'm a big NFL. I like the Jets, who are like the worst team ever. And I've got my son. My son's a Chelsea fan for some reason, so he's forced me to like Chelsea. So I don't really support any team, but I guess I support the Chelsea because of him, just to keep it in the family.
Fair. Well, look, I really appreciate you giving time to us today and sharing your story. It's amazing. And I want all my listeners to go and check you out, especially those that perhaps could find what you're doing useful to their lives. And I just wanted to ask you one last question, really. If you went back to your younger self and gave some advice, what would it be?
Oh, God. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. And I was thinking partly, like, if you give advice to your younger self, part of it, you need to almost go through problems to learn from them. Like I was thinking, let's say you can go to your younger self and you could say, don't do A, B, and C, and then you don't do it. I almost wonder, would I have been able to do what I did because I would have grown, in the way I did? And sometimes I just think the experiences themselves are as valuable as the lessons you learn from them, which is maybe not a good answer to your question. I mean, because I was thinking, well, in some ways, don't take things quite as seriously as I often did. But if I hadn't taken things so seriously, I wouldn't have learned lessons. I wouldn't have probably done things I had done, like I said, always really, learn how to manage better, how to work better with people in different ways. And, but if I, probably some of my difficulty in the early days got teach first through some difficult moments that, if I had learned those lessons too young. So it's hard to know, isn't it? Because, I think the main lesson, I guess I would have to say is just enjoy as much as you can, right? Because I guess as you start getting older, you realize that you have to enjoy what you're doing. And, if you spend too much time of your life working on things you don't really enjoy, it's a bit of a wasted life.
I totally agree. And I like the thought pattern too. It's a debate, isn't it, really, that whole changing history and the danger it can bring. I mean, that's one of the reasons we call this podcast a Good Luck Club podcast, because I think bad luck can be good luck in disguise and good luck can be bad luck in disguise. And it's all about the journey, isn't it? Enjoy the journey, as you said, quite rightly. Look, I want to thank you again for taking the time. I'm grateful. Appreciate what you're doing for the human race and helping young people in particular get the education they deserve. So thanks so much for that. And look forward to having you back on the podcast in the future. And thanks for sharing your story.
Great. Thank you. And really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. If you found what Brett had to say interesting, do me a favor, go check out his social media pages in the links below and give him a like on his business. It doesn't cost you anything, and that could mean the algorithm that controls us all these days will finally get the content to the people that need it. I know that you have 764,412 podcasts you could be listening to. And you take the time out to listen to ours. I hope we brought you value today, and if we have, hit the like button, or if you think someone out there would find some of these insights useful, please also smash the share button, as they say. I would be really grateful. Again, we know you could be listening to other podcasts, and we feel incredibly lucky that you're listening to ours.